That was the most excitement of the trip, I think. Yeah, they're going through those.
Huh?
Those elk. I was going to say that's where they're going through.
All right, here we are.
All right, thank you, sir.
All right, guys, come here.
How are you guys today?
Doing all right. How about you?
Good.
I don't think he's gonna bite.
Alright guys, well, welcome out to the National Elk Refuge. Today your driver is going to be Clint.
Howdy, guys.
Hi, Clint.
Clint's super awesome. He knows a ton about the wildlife in the refuge. So if you ask him lots of questions, he'll be sure to answer all of them for you. And if you appreciate his efforts once you get back here in the yard, feel free to let him know. Have fun. We'll see you back here in a little bit.
All righty, guys. So we'll get boogieing along. We'll follow these guys out here. It got real busy all of a sudden. So up front today here we've got Butch and Sundance. So these two are Percheron draft horses. They weigh in at about 2,000 pounds apiece. Oh yeah, these guys do all the hard work for us. Butch, Sundance, sit up.
I didn't know.
In fact, this team here, this is what I like to call deluxe. These guys, they come complete with dual intake, dual carburetor, and don't forget about that dual exhaust. So as we get started here, folks, just a few quick safety things. While I'm moving, just stay seated. It does get kind of bumpy out here, so I don't want to toss you guys around or anything. But once I get out to the elk, I will stop in a couple different places for you. At those points, feel free to stand up, move around so you can get the best views and the best pictures possible. Just be aware that the horses can kind of shift the wagon back and forth from time to time. Also, if I could have everybody take their cell phones, turn them on to silent or vibrate for me. We do get close out there today, and we've learned over the years, elk aren't quite as fond of the Michael Jackson and Taylor Swift ringtones that are popular nowadays. However, you will want to keep your phones kind of handy. There's a lot of great photo opportunities out there today. While you are taking pictures though, just don't make any calls towards the elk. Whistling, kissing sounds, clicking your tongue, things like that. The elk, to be completely honest with you, they really don't care you're there, so they won't hardly look at you. However, the horses here, all those different sounds just happen to mean go. So these guys are voice activated. And then last but not least, just hold on to everything nice and tight. If it falls overboard, more often than not, I can't get out to pick it up. So just be aware of that. But like Molly said, as we go along, folks, ask lots and lots of questions. That's really the key to a great ride. Because then I got to talk about all the stuff you guys want to hear about, rather than the stuff that I want to tell you. Just so you are aware as well, I do hold the record for putting the most people to sleep on a single ride. So you guys better be careful. So how many of you guys ever been out here to the National Elk Refuge before?
We drove by a couple of times, that's it.
Well, first time out here? Awesome.
Yep.
All the way around is what I like to see. So the National Elk Refuge here, this is actually just one of over 500 national wildlife refuges in the United States. There's at least one in every single state, and usually one within about 3 hours of every major city. But they're all for different kinds of wildlife. This one's for elk. There's one for migrational birds. There's in Alabama, believe it or not, there's even one for mice. Yeah, the Alabama beach mouse. The purpose of all these refuges is basically the same. So the National Elk Refuge, it's been here for an incredibly long time. It started clear back in 1912. So it's over 100 years old. But the reason why it's here, you have to figure that out, you've got to go back farther in time. So people first started settling here in this valley in about the 1860s. You guys ever heard of the Homestead Act before? You guys know, yeah. Have you heard of the Homestead Act? So in 1862, Abraham Lincoln signed the Homestead Act. And what it was essentially to encourage people to come settle the West. You could come out and claim 160 acres for yourself. All you had to do was live there for 5 or more years and make improvements on the land. And so a lot of people started coming out this way and settling. When they came into this valley, it took them a little longer. It's pretty rugged terrain to get through with a wagon. But they did come here, and they started settling out here, right on these flats. That's part of the refuge now. And back then, they didn't have near the amount of information that we have now about wildlife and ecosystems, migrations, all that kind of stuff. And so they planted themselves right smack dab in the middle of elk wintering range. And so the elk came down in the wintertime, and instead of there being tall grass underneath the snow like there had been for centuries, there was stubble left over from that year's harvest. So a lot of elk started starving to death here in this valley. The longer and longer people were here, the worse and worse it got. And it got to the point in 1897, 10 to 12,000 elk starved to death out here. That's insane. And the local people, they knew something needed to change, but they didn't have any resources to make that change to themselves. So they put a petition together, took some pictures of all the dead elk, and they traveled back to Congress. And they're like, hey, we need some help out here, send us something. So in 1911, Congress sent out a biologist. He came out and he studied for just under a year to figure out what was going to be the best solution in this area to preserve the elk population. And he came up with 2 things. 1, feed the elk. Make up for lost habitat with a supplemental diet. And so that's what they did. And starting in 1911, they started feeding the elk each year. Originally, it wasn't right here, because all of this was owned by people. However, there was a local guy named Stephen Leak down south of town. Where you know where that big red barn is as you're coming into town? That's where they started feeding the elk back in 1911. That was owned by Stephen Leak. It's now owned by Lockhart Cattle Company. So that's a really old barn that you're looking at there. That's where they started that supplemental feeding program. The next year, in 1912, they started the National Elk Refuge. However, at that point, all this, like I said, was owned, so there wasn't much to it. It wasn't until 1914 they started buying homesteads back from the people. They bought 44 homesteads to create a refuge that's just under 25,000 acres. Before that, so like early 1800s, mountain men started trapping for beaver in this area. In their journals, they recorded 20 to 70,000. Now in the whole Jackson Hole Valley, which is kind of just this whole area, there's about 11,000. On the refuge this year, there was about 80 some odd percent of that. There was like 8,500 elk here on the refuge this year. So the number has dropped, and the reason is they're trying to find the balance in the ecosystem. So now that people are here, the ecosystem can't handle as many elk as it used to. The winter range, even though it's almost 25,000 acres, is still only about a quarter of the elk's natural wintering range. So their winter range has been very limited. Their summer range, however, has not been limited. So the number of elk that are able to be supported up in the mountains is way higher than 11,000. However, it's just not possible. But they do want a higher number of elk to make it back each year than the winter range can naturally support. And so they'll supplementally feed the elk in order to encourage a larger number to be able to make it back in the summertime. So each year, once there's under 300 pounds of available forage per acre, they start feeding them. They use alfalfa pellets and tractors now. They just kind of drive back and forth and spread them on the ground. And they found that the sweet spot is somewhere below half of their diet. They don't want to feed them too much to create dependence, but they do want to give them enough to make a difference. Looks like we're probably going to get a nice view of the Tetons as well.
Yeah, that's what we were doing.
They look really cool, kind of cool with the clouds behind them today there. One of the other cool mountains in this area that's not quite as popular as the Tetons is this one over here. So most people know this one is Sleeping Indian. It's that tall one with all the cliffs on it.
Yeah.
It looks like a Native American chief lying on his back with his arms across. That's pretty cool, isn't it?
Yeah, very cool.
Definitely not as popular as the Tetons, but I think just as iconic, or should be anyways. So that's really cool. The actual name of that mountain is Sheep Mountain. That's where a lot of the bighorn sheep that come down here in winter on the refuge go in the summer. So you'll get a big, like there's about 60 some odd bighorn sheep that winter on the backside of this butte right here. It's cool. You can go back there and see them. If you take Broadway, which is the main road through town, if you take it all the way to the east side, it'll kind of turn into the refuge road. And you just drive about a mile back there and find a parking lot. You can pull into those and look at the bighorn sheep from there.
Oh, cool. Gotta do that.
So we're going to come right up over here and we're going to take a look at this sweet antler. Right up here hanging out on the ground over here, the big old one. So every single year, all the male elk, they all lose their antlers. And then they regrow them every year. Yeah, so they shed them most of the time in about March is when most of them shed.
So interesting. I was like, wow, are these females?
Yeah, so there's a lot of females out right now. For some reason, when the bulls started shedding their antlers, a lot of them went up north after that. So there's mostly just females and really young bulls down here still. I'm gonna let you guys get some pictures of this before we head out to the elk there. So every year that when they regrow their antlers, they get larger and larger.
Oh wow, that's goodness gracious, they're huge.
Oh, he just happened to have shed that antler in the bumpiest place possible. So that is a very large mature antler right there. That's a nice one.
Yeah, that is huge.
Sundance. Hey, stand up there.
Okay, you
Look,
got it.
don't
Good,
scrub.
good.
Wait. That thing's really cool. So every single year, the antlers get larger and larger until they hit about 8 to 12. In the last couple of years of their life, they'll actually get a little small. Males will choose a bull based on how pretty his antlers are.
Oh, Lord.
Glorified peacock feathers. And their secondary purpose, of course, is sparring with them, fighting off other males to protect their harem. But the main purpose is just looking good. So that bull, the better his antlers, the bigger his harem. It can be as small as 2 or as large as 30.
Really?
Yeah, so they can be pretty big.
Magnet.
That's right.
So each year the Boy Scouts, they come out, once all the elk have left, they'll come out at the end of April, pick up all the antlers, and then they have an auction in town. 25% of the money goes back to the Scouts for doing the work, and that's their yearly fundraiser. And then 75% comes to the refuge.
That's awesome.
They use that primarily for habitat enhancement like irrigation, planting grass, just making this place better in the summertime for the elk when they get here in the wintertime. The refuge, they want to do as much as they can during the summer when the elk aren't here, so they have to do even less when the elk are here. Let the elk just do their thing as much as possible during the winter. So really the only interference that happens while the elk are here is hunting and feeding. That's about it. It's got an inside really fluffy, fuzzy, like downy stuff that traps heat in it. Just keeps them warm, tight, nice and close. And then their outer layer is a guard hair. It's hollow with a honeycomb pattern in it. Fills up with warm air and keeps the cold out. So they're extremely well insulated. When it snows out here, like if it lands on us or even on the horses, it melts. On those guys, it just builds up. So they got to stand up and shake all the snow off of them when it's snowing. Kind of crazy.
It is crazy. Can you imagine negative 40, baby?
I can imagine -1.
All right, here we go. Butch, Sundance, step.
About halfway into the group. on bed. What is this?
Yeah, it's kind of silly.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, very into that. They're all still like fight one. Forgot your wife's life.
Hi, honey. That's my wife.
But did you grow up here?
So I grew up in Utah, but I've been up here for about the last 2.5 years. Came up here to play with some big ponies. These are perfect.
The one way out there?
Yeah, you see
Yep.
these horns, they're just like a perfect view.
There's another one right beside it.
Right there.
Is it here? So it's like just not in the middle of like the wind kind of blowing in your eyes.
Today they started out, they're like, we really like this grass right here, clear down there, and then they're like, never mind, and they hoofed it up to here, and then they came over to here and bedded down. So we've been, every ride I've come out, they've been in a completely different spot.
Oh my god.
Like, this is the first time I've been on this side of that creek all day long.
Oh my gosh. Well, I would say we had a good view.
Yeah, I would say so. It's the first time I've seen the Tetons on a ride today, so.
How many does it take to get up and start running for all of them to do it?
Most of the time just one.
Really?
Yeah, if one of them spooks and starts running, they'll all run.
That's amazing.
Most of the time.
I'd love to see that.
It's kind of cool to
All
watch.
right, Jilly, go out there and take them. Get this guy.
He's like, okay.
He's down there at the end and they're moving, but
I'm gonna kind of hit this a little different. This is like a culvert for this big ditch right here.
Oh, no.
But oh man, it's all clay, so it just gets really rutted out. Okay, that definitely could have been worse.
Not too bad.